Daredevil, Nightcrawler, and Huntress are probably some of the main heroes within the Marvel and DC universe that you would think of first when you hear Catholicism or Christianity. It's kind of ingrained into how the writer has written them into these stories, and it's part of their character and then their intrinsic motivation of why they fight crime or why they fight bad guys. And today I have Odin with me from OMB Reviews to kind of discuss where are all these other heroes that have this kind of Christian faith or Catholic faith. How is it that that I can only think of 3 right off the top of my head, like I said, those first 3. But once again, thanks again for being on the show, Odin. I appreciate it, brother.
Of course. It's again, thank you again for reaching out to me to have these discussions. It's been a lot of fun so far, and I'm looking forward to talking about this one because there's just a lot of questions I think to be asked, especially when you think about just standard numbers alone, that you would think there might be a market for those kinds of stories. But I think you did leave out one character, and it was a special comic. And I don't know exactly the full range of this comic, but I'm pretty sure that back in the 90s or so, I believe there was a John Paul II comic where he is fighting and defeating communism. I don't know exactly what that was or if it was just a single issue, some random person made it or not, but I remember seeing images from a John Paul II comic.
Well, now you have piqued my interest, sir, because that sounds awesome, and I'm almost kind of you need to take my nerd card because I actually haven't heard of that one before. So that's pretty cool.
It's pretty obscure. I mean, it's not like they had a run of comics or anything like that. I think it may have just been like one issue, if even that.
I do know of one. So Rob Liefeld, the creator of Deadpool, he wrote a book for Image Comics back in the 90s called Prophet. And it's this, of course, just muscle-bound dude. And I think from what I remember reading in his series, all he does is he's just fighting bad guys, but while quoting Bible verses and stuff. It's pretty cool. It's very 90s, very, very 90s action hero-esque. So I guess there's another one. But I found it interesting though, because on our last video, and I'll link it in the description so that you guys can watch it, we spoke about how Christians seem to be almost villainized, whether it's through willful ignorance or through intentionality. But with heroes, though, with such a broad spectrum of individuals who read comics, you would think that, I think we were saying 2 billion people on this earth right now are practicing Christians. You would think that a good portion of those would be reading comics, though it is a niche market or a niche hobby. And I don't understand why we don't see more Christian creators or more Christian or Catholic characters to kind of include that type of religion within the writing. Have you seen this before, or do you have anything that maybe I haven't seen before, or any wisdom on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of something that you see across the board in multiple respects, right? So within the comic industry, within even movies and television, unfortunately, when it comes to movies, the most Christian films that get the most attention, or at the very least that are the most well known, usually come from that company Pureflix. And they're usually not very good, right? They're just just really bad, generic, almost Hallmark quality, but for Christians. As I say, Hallmark for Christians, Pureflix, right?
Yeah.
And it's just not. And so, really, the only of recent memory, the latest film that actually took a Catholic person and actually told the story of this Catholic person was the movie Father Stu, starring Mark Wahlberg. It was a passion project. It was a passion project of Mark Wahlberg, and he wanted very much to be a part of it, to tell this priest story, and to show how basically a modern day St. Augustine a story, or St. Ignatius of Loyola story, where it's someone who starts off, they're very rough, they do a lot of bad things, and then over the course of their life they slowly go through this conversion of heart, and eventually they find faith. and it was actually very well done, like, because it was not done by Pureflix, it was done by a more general studio, and having Mark Wahlberg behind it helps, right? Because he's able to advocate on behalf of the project. And if memory serves me, I only saw it one time. I'm pretty sure he actually was able to get Mel Gibson to be in the film, as well as, like, I think his dad or something. Okay. Again, my mind might be off on that, but yeah. So, like, other than that, the only other one that ever comes to mind for me that's just, like, so well done is The Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson. And just that film did so many things, right? It was one of the most successful rated R films. It was one of the most successful faith-based movies. And it was able to do something that so many other films weren't able to do, which was to bring in just not even only Christians, but other people too, to say, what is this all about? We're hearing all of these different rumors and all of these different things about it. And I think ultimately one of the reasons why you don't see a lot of these films and you don't see a lot of these concepts is because even though there's this massive base, I mean, you look to America, you look to any part of the world mostly, and the majority of the religious population is going to have some denomination of Christianity. I think a lot of it is because you have a lot of Christians who ultimately don't find, and at least this is what I think, that if they want to feel a story, or if they want to see a story that is about faith, I feel that they will probably want to go to scripture, or they will want to go to more maybe classic animated stories or classic television stories. For instance, I know that The Chosen is a series that has gotten a lot of attention and a lot of, so people would rather watch those kinds of stories rather than original content with Christian characters, if that makes any sense. It's almost like there's not a lot of desire, it seems, at least within Christian circles, for Christian fiction, right? Of characters that are fictionalized but are Christian heroes, And
that's such a great point, man. And I think I would have to agree in terms of, like, because you have the book of Judges where you have, like, individuals like Gideon, who is this, like, the least of his tribe. It's almost like a redemption story, like the least of his tribe, and yet God chooses him to lead these armies. And, like, there are great characters like that within scripture that you can go to and kind of pull from. And so I think that people would probably, like, at least Christians and those with the belief of a certain denomination where they are very involved with scripture, and probably go to that for multiple things. But, like, your casual Christian, I feel like, is almost lacking that source of creativity, whether they're making it or indulging in it, watching it and enjoying it as a mode of escapism. But yeah, that is a really good point, that I'm sure most Christians just go, like, I don't really need to read this, like, sci-fi book or this fantasy series or watch this new movie, because, like, I have this as my source of, maybe not escapism, but, like, these are true stories that almost feel like adventure or heroism and stuff like that.
Escape into the real world, almost, as it were.
Right. It reminds me of a hardbound graphic novel that I have that's called The Action Bible, and these individuals put together all these significant biblical events in a comic book, and kind of copied it and made it for a broad audience of people. But I wonder if we'll ever see kind of Christian creators, or maybe not even Christian, but more conservative creators, being in these spaces that aren't making films with a budget of like $10,000 or like making big budget films. Because I mean, God bless their heart, but I cannot get through one of those films. It's
hard.
The acting, the set design, like just little things like that. Cinematography.
The God's
is
Not
like,
Dead films come to mind, and it's again, you're just like, I see how you're trying, and I can see how this might appeal to a certain audience, but and I think that's the trick. How do you, as a Christian creator, create something that both evangelizes and yet does not come across as forcing the issue? right?
Absolutely.
And I think that is something that a lot of Christian creators struggle with, because I think a lot of Christian creators probably think, if I deviate away too much from my calling for evangelization through creativity, if I go too far away, if I go too much into the fiction of trying to make it more broadly appealing, that I might somehow be losing the essence of what I'm trying to do, right? And so I think that is probably also why you either get very poorly put together stories, or just not many stories at all, because it's just this, again, it's almost like this trap of, if you make it too religious, okay, it's only going to appeal to a certain demographic, it's not going to be successful. Whereas if you make it too broad, it could end up losing any sense of heart that you originally had in the project as well. So I can see how it's tough for a lot of creators of faith, especially to try and bring those ideas into their worlds.
100%. And because I have read stories before, or comics before, where it almost feels like this overabundance of like, hey, do you get it? Like, you are saved, like, understand, like, you know, and I, for me, I maybe I enjoy it, but for others, I can totally see like, whoa, this is like, you know, they need to take a step back, because this is it's almost too much. It's like an assault, because it's like, okay, now it's just, I don't want to call it propaganda, but it is almost kind of evangelizing through the medium instead of focusing on story. I mean, because it's what we always talk about in our creative spaces here on YouTube, is like so many projects right now, whether it's Marvel, Disney, Warner Brothers, DC, if they focused on story first and had some sort of underlying story to tell, or maybe they didn't even want to tell that, but maybe later in interviews said, you know, hey, I'm blessed to have this opportunity. Just little things like that maybe spark someone's mind to go, maybe like a Chris Pratt, where in all his movies, you would never think that he is, you know, a churchgoer. But on his off time, you bet your ass he's going to be like, yeah, you know what? I'm a practicing Christian. I go to church with my wife and kids. Like, yeah. And so, like you said, it is this kind of balance between, you don't want to be so assaulting with some of the evangelizing, but you also want to be able to portray to people, I can live a Christian life and still be a successful creator in this space.
It's almost as if, and this is something that just came to mind, it's almost as if they need to, and Christian creators in general need to follow the example of even Christ. Because remember how Christ evangelized. He, in some cases, was direct, but in most cases, he used what? He used stories. He used parables, right? And he was able to weave together these stories with these very interesting characters, and they all had these deeper meanings behind them, right? And so we read them, and because I think it's just something that we're so used to, we kind of take it for granted. But I think if we actually like pay attention, it's like, this is actually a compelling story. And what he's doing is he's guiding these people that don't know who he is, don't believe in him at all, and yet he is using this to help guide them closer. And so that, I think, is something that maybe some Christian creators could go back to, is go back even to Christ himself, who was not always, you know, very much to the point. He was, hey, let me tell you something that you would recognize, right? Something from your time, from your era, from your occupation, but then tell you a story that will, again, bring you along. Storytelling is so powerful, right? It can bring you to different worlds. It can bring you to different concepts and ideas that you've never thought of before. Maybe trying to, in that way, obviously it's easier said than done, but trying to find a way to craft storytelling. And at the heart is that message, right? At the heart is the gospel, but the rest of the story has, again, that sense of originality to it as well. That's meant to guide the mind, and hopefully the mind and heart can finally come together as one, is the hope. But at the very least, it can guide the mind at the very least, and that should be, I think, the ultimate goal.
That's brilliant. I mean, I remember one of the I forget who it was that I went to go see speak, but they were talking about how we almost see the world through stories. Like, stories are so palpable for people to, like, they can understand everything through stories, how the world was created, or how our own stories unfold. Like, you know, when someone goes like, oh, what'd you do today? You tell the story of your day, you know what I mean? Like, so stories do have such an impact on us. And I think that what you mentioned is brilliant in that type of wisdom and that aspect of understanding that these stories are nuanced and that we can still tell these beautifully well done, well thought out stories in these creative spaces and not have to be so direct or, too over the head, if you will, like, you know, as we see most movies and films are as of late.
Yeah. And I think also, if you look back to some of the greatest writers, I mean, obviously in the news recently and in pop culture news especially, Rings of Power, right? And we think back to the works of Tolkien. We think back to the works of C.S. Lewis. Both of them Christian. Both of them, you can see their Christian thought, their Christian, and some people try to say, well, they were very clear that they were not, you know, they were not all for, they were not supportive of metaphorical, you know, stuff. It's like, no, but they still very much had their faith influence their writing. And I think they may not have purposely tried to have a character come across in a certain theological light, but the character still did. And it's because, again, of their own foundation. So that's where we need to find it. Again, if we are living out faith, right? If we are actually, you know, at the center of our very hearts, then the stories that we write can also have that similar impact, right? Because if we're gonna, especially when you think about how many films, it seems, aren't very family friendly. I mean, even cartoons these days are preaching some type of ideology or are preaching some type of a thing that should be left to a parent to talk with their child. So there's probably actually a hunger for just wholesome content. And if we can just take the route of it not being, you know, overt Christianity necessarily, right? Again, the role of Tolkien, right? There's so many. That's one of the things I love also about Friday Night Tights, right? Is that you've got someone like Gary, right? Who I don't really even know exactly what kind of faith background he has. And that's one of the beauties about us and the show is that we have people from all different backgrounds, and some you don't even know like where they come from. And yet you still see that he has this love and passion for the world of Tolkien and the world that Tolkien built, and still enough respect to say, yeah, if you're going to go in the direction that kind of strips away even the Christian ideals that even I myself may not actually hold on to or connect with, it takes away the soul of the story. So how do we become, and how do we help others become the next J.R. Tolkien, right? Or the next C.S. Lewis?
Well, yeah, I mean, look at how many people, like you said with Gary, for just as one example, but how many people, the Lord of the Rings books, because it started as those books, like really touched people's hearts and inspired modern fantasy. I mean, you could argue that modern fantasy storytellers took their influence from Tolkien, who originally, whether it was subconsciously or not, had those elements of Christianity or Catholicism within, or like, you know, at least just the disciplines of Christ and those beliefs within that story. And yet people from all over the world, and I'm sure atheists too, are part of that. Billions of people that he reached still enjoyed the book because they were able to see something in the book that was not just allegory, or it wasn't just, oh, well, this is just Christian propaganda. It was a story first and foremost that told, had redemption arcs and heroes' journeys and all things that we see in scripture, and that he probably imparted in the book, whether, like I said, subconsciously or not, but it still reached this broad audience. And ultimately, I think what I would love to see at some point, and maybe in my lifetime or our lifetime or not, is to have something like that be created again, maybe not to the significance of a Lord of the Rings, you know, but something similar to where it can reach such a broad audience with undertones of, the creator's background in faith. So I think that's super interesting.
I think you make a good point too. I think we're long past due for a new modern epic fantasy series. We really haven't, I think, seen any that have truly lived up to the same standard of what was set before by some of the greats, and it'd be awesome to see that come to life.
Well, I can tell you that what you guys are doing over on Friday Night Tights is just the start of it. You know what I mean? Like I think having those conversations like we did in our last video and what we're doing now is kind of part of it, because it gets those wheels turning, and to see that stuff like that is just so enlightening, and so it gives me hope for the future. But those interactions are so important, because we never know exactly who it is that we are going to plant that seed. Of course, we may not be able to change hearts and minds fully, but we can at least, plant the seed and hope that through our storytelling and through our talks and conversations like this, that people can hopefully see that this type of creation is possible. But, well, thank you again for being on, brother. I'll give you the last word if you have anything before you head out.
Well, again, thank you so very much for having me on. It's been a great discussion, and please invite me on again. I'd love to have more talks about stuff like this. And I guess the last word I would say is I did find it was actually so Karol Wojtyła, which is the Polish name of John Paul II. He is actually a Marvel character. He is from Earth 616.
Hey, there you go.
So
okay.
I have it right now on a Marvel fandom.
That's so funny that even you were like, I'm pretty sure it was just a one shot, and sure enough, it was just that one issue.
And I had forgotten that was actually in Marvel. It was so funny because I was looking at it. It was like, wait a minute, it's actually mentioning that he's from Earth 616. Okay, wow.
Well, he exists within the real universe, not the Disney Marvel universe, which is like 99999 or something. 616 is the definitive one, and
there you go.
So that's pretty cool, man. Well, shoot, we need to have Odin on the show more often to school me on my own comic obsession. So
that is about the limit of my comic knowledge. So I will just take that as a victory and then walk away and retire from comic recommendations.
Well, this has been an absolute blast, man. I can't thank you enough for being on. Let us know in the comment section below if there's anything that you would love Odin and I to talk about in more detail or more depth. Let us know. And it would be, because these are just two topics that we thought of this week that we thought would be pertinent to our last video, talking about how Christians are depicted in kind of this villainous way, and then why we don't see them portrayed in a more heroic way. So if you guys can think of anything else, let us know in the comment section below. As always, thank you guys again for watching this video, and I'll see y'all in the next one.